Artwork has always been something that's subjective and open to interpretation. What one person might like, another person will inevitably hate. As with all things, artwork has gotten more and more complicated, to the point where, eventually, video games are considered an art form. Which I totally agree with. Whether it be sprite work or 3D models, chiptune or orchestrated, beeps or full voice acting, video games are absolutely an art form. It's actually only recently that public perception of video games has shifted, and as a result of video games being considered art, you get people like Phil Fish and Josef Fares appearing out of the woodwork, acting like snobs because not everyone appreciates their games. In a recent interview, or what I assume is an interview, the aforementioned Josef Fares states that he thinks 52% playthrough rate on his game, A Way Out, is bad. He compares his masterpiece to a James Cameron movie, which besides being false equivalence, is laughable. James Cameron's made more money on his bad movies than Josef Fares made or will make in his entire career. But I digress. Mr. Fares continues by complaining that since most people only look at the first 40% or so of a game, then why should they put effort into a game beyond that point? Because, Mr. Fares, if only 52% of the people who have bought your game are seeing it through to the end, clearly your game wasn't good enough to capture them. If you focused on the later 60% of the game, maybe those numbers would have been a little higher. See, the reason why most people don't play past the first 40% of games they purchase is because after that point, you guys stop caring. It's only natural that people will stop caring too. Josef Fares also mentions that when his publisher asked about game length, for what I can only guess is A Way Out, which is only 6 hours by Mr. Fares' own admission, he says, and I quote, "Why are you asking that? I'm not even going to answer that shit." To which I say, bullshit. You might have thought that, Mr. Fares, but I highly doubt you actually said that, because no one with a lick of professionalism would be so brazen to the people who are willing to put their artwork out into the world. So the real chain of events was probably that you said you're struggling to reach 6 hours, they threatened to pull your game, and you cried until they acquiesced. Still, even though Josef Fares is as pretentious as he is unprofessional, he does bring up a good question I think every developer should ask themselves. Why should they put the hard work into a game beyond the first half when half the people that play your game won't see it? The obvious answer that I think a lot of developers miss, including Mr. Fares, is that if you have any integrity as a game developer and any pride in your work, you'll put hard work into your game from start to finish, so people will want to see your game through to the end. Josef Fares also states that it's harder to make longer games while keeping it diverse, and so he prefers to make shorter games. I agree with the article writer and Mr. Fares on this one, that makes sense. Why make a game longer than it has to be? Make the game the length you feel is appropriate, just price it right. Which brings us to our next point. There's something to be said about the price for games. A Way Out was released in March 2018 and is currently $30. Now ask yourself, knowing what you know about the game length and the developer's own words, would you pay $30 for a 6-hour game where you know the last 3 hours aren't going to be as good as the first 3? It's kind of funny that Josef Fares is trying to position himself as this sort of high-horse developer / distinguished artiste, but instead accidentally gives the reader every single reason to not buy and play his game. So the general idea of this article / interview is that Josef Fares wants us to stop worrying about things like replayability and game length. There's no real reason given for this opinion other than I guess he wants to get lazy with his games and still reap the same rewards as if he worked hard on them. Personally, I think game length and replayability are both very important factors in whether I'll buy a video game or not. Look at games like Chrono Trigger or Super Mario 64, both retro titles that people still play today. They're the right length for their respective genres, are still diverse in their offerings throughout the entirety of their respective games, and both encourage replay value in their own ways. Yet Josef Fares wants us to forget all that when examining video games. I guess it explains why A Way Out was ultimately published by Electronic Arts. Josef Fares and EA have very similar perspectives on how games should be developed. What do you think about this story? Do you think things like game length and replayability matter to you in a game? How about game length and replayability in regards to game price? Be sure to comment below and let us know, and be sure to subscribe if you haven't yet. Or follow us on social media, links in the description below. See you soon.